I really didn't get into psychedelics until I was older. And I was suffering from a depression and I was looking for ways out. And I started to read about this same thing, this ayahuasca, which I'm sure you and your listeners have heard of, famous Amazonian psychedelic, and how it's used in a ritualized medical setting, and how it had been helping people with various mental health issues. And at the time, I'd also started practicing meditation and other things. But the call of the ayahuasca was strong.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Ocean Malandra, and we're going to be talking about psychedelics. Among other things, Ocean is a freelance environmental journalist and travel writer who splits his time between Northern California and South America, and he, along with Dr. Natalie Dyer PhD, has written a book called Infinite Perceptions: The Role of Psychedelics in Global Transformation. We're going to be talking about the different types of psychedelics, from LSD, psilocybin, peyote, mescaline, a little history, how they've been used in indigenous cultures, how they're being used now, some of the scientific research that has come to the forefront in recent years, and a seeming resurgence in the interest and use of psychedelics to treat mental health issues and depression and a variety of other things. So let's jump into it. This is Ocean Malandra. Ocean Malandra, I am so glad you're here. I'm in Southern California. You're in Northern. So we have another California podcast happening today. And we're going to be talking psychedelics, folks. Ooh. And as I was telling Ocean before we started, my first introduction to psychedelics was through through LSD and Timothy Leary, finding out about that in the 60s. That's when I sort of discovered what that was, and then later learned a little bit more about things that were less lab created. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. How did you get started in being interested? I know you're an environmental journalist, so that's sort of fits in with all this, I think. How did you get started getting into psychedelics and finding out more about it?
Well, hello, Bob, and thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to join you from... You're probably in sunny California. I'm here in foggy California.
Yeah.
There's two people don't know always know there's two Californias even in the summer.
At least two.
At least, yeah. So my name is Ocean. My parents were now they would get upset if you call them hippies. They considered themselves beatniks. And you probably know what a beatnik was, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the beatniks, for those who don't know, they were kind of the literary countercultural movement that preceded the hippies. And a lot of people feel like the hippie movement was kind of based on. I always see it as they were kind of a literary, more intellectual movement. And then the hippies became a more musical, popular movement. Like it became more about everybody. But there were some famous writers, and they were actually some of the first people in the West to experience with psychedelics as well. There's a book called the Yahe Letter between Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, where Burroughs, who wrote The Naked Lunch, which that book was about his drug addiction, right? If anybody's familiar with that book, he went to Colombia and he went looking for this fabled psychedelic, which is ayahuasca, to cure himself. And that was way back in like 1949. And then, of course, people experimenting with LSD at the time, like you said, in the 60s, and psychedelics became a major part of the hippie movement. And so I always just kind of grew up to some degree around psychedelic culture.
It's pretty amazing as a kid, I
Yeah.
suppose, to see that. I did not. So I can only imagine what that was like. So your parents were into that kind of stuff, obviously, that um, was, like a normal thing to see that. So you were already sort of open minded in terms of what it could do or what it was for. I personally was incredibly curious about what would happen taking certain things, and I experimented as a youth. Not like over the top necessarily, but enough to go, um, hmm, oh, this is certainly another way to look at the world. And I would say the benefit was the things that most people took very seriously were not that serious, and, and the things that and then there were the things that were important that nobody talked about. Those became that's the thing I became the most aware of doing that stuff. And then there was also the silly recreational aspect that was as I would say, this is some fun giggly stuff.
It's funny because there are all those aspects, right? But I really like what you just said, the stuff that is there and people don't talk about, right? So that the kind of hippie psychedelic movement went kind of underground for a while. And what we're experiencing right now is it's like the psychedelic renaissance, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there are all these problems that we don't quite have a concrete solution to, and that ability of psychedelics to kind of bring up other. It's something I get into in this book, psychedelics bringing up other possibilities. And some of those possibilities can just make you laugh. I mean, because a joke is that, right? A joke is just something you never thought about. You see something in a way you never thought about it before. But an insight and a solution also works the same way.
How old were you the first time you tried any kind of psychedelic, and what was it?
My first psychedelic.
Yeah.
So, when you grow up around a bunch of, like, I grew up in San Francisco as a kid, and honestly, Bob, when you grow up around a lot of people who've used a lot of drugs, it actually makes you kind of cautious, or it did for me, because there's like some people, and I was just like, yeah, I don't want to be that fried. Do you know what I
Oh,
mean?
oh, there's a lot of casualties, and we can talk about that because, like, there's people that should not be doing certain things, and certainly not to the quantities.
Right. So even though I grew up around a lot of stuff, I wasn't one of those people that was just like totally open with it. I was cautious. And I really, I mean, I experimented, but I really didn't get into psychedelics until I was older. And I was suffering from a depression, and I was looking for ways out. And I started to read about this same thing, this ayahuasca, which I'm sure you and your listeners have heard of, famous Amazonian psychedelic, and how it's used in a ritualized medical setting, and how it had been helping people with various mental health issues. And at the time, I'd also started practicing meditation and other things. But the call of the ayahuasca was strong.
So that's pretty much when you tried to. Did you try to do it sort of as a ritualistic kind of thing first?
Yeah, I did. And I kind of prepped for it, like I said, with a lot of like meditation and stuff like that. And I honestly, yeah, and I don't recommend this, but I just kind of ordered the different components online and cooked them in my apartment in San Francisco. And and
Nice.
like I said, don't try that at home, kids. But eventually, though, I ended up going to South America, and I ended up drinking ayahuasca in different contexts and actually volunteering at a retreat center in Peru. My career as an environmental journalist kind of evolved out of these travels to South America. And over time, As I was doing like reporting in indigenous communities, I got deeper and deeper into drinking ayahuasca in more and more traditional settings, and the whole thing just kind of evolved. So, in a way, my main psychedelic has been ayahuasca. Although I've also experimented with mushrooms and LSD and all kinds of other things. But in a way, ayahuasca has been kind of my psychedelic path.
Well, I've heard some wonderful things about it. I that's one I never did because I don't do any sort of mind altering stuff anymore.
Right.
Um, I'm one of those people that moderation really isn't in my vocabulary when it comes to that stuff. So, to me, anything that would alter me from the neck up, I don't touch it anymore. I really went down that path a little hard, particularly with alcohol and weed. But I also did, a lot of other things, and so I don't do anything. And as curious as I am about it, I don't want to, jeopardize that sort of clarity that I have. But that's just me personally. That's why I was asking or talking about why some people probably shouldn't do that. If you're somebody that's, got maybe an addictive past or personality type, because, if a little is good, then I want to do more to the point of my own detriment. So that's just sort of telling my audience a little bit about me. And I'm not against any of this stuff. I think it's great well, it's great if it works. I'm on the side of what works is what I always say. That wouldn't work for me just because I don't want to, change what my lifestyle is at this point. But I have heard some wonderful things. And also in terms of depression, there was a woman in San Francisco, I think her last name is Waldman, who wrote a book about microdosing LSD
Hmm.
and helping with her depression. So I'm like, well, if that worked, do that.
Hmm.
That sounds awesome. So what happens in the brain? This is when I was fascinated when I was looking at your bio.
Hmm.
That ask them about what happens in the brain, because I was always curious. Is like, what here I'm sitting here, I'm this certain guy in a certain reality, and now, I take this substance, and these things open up, color and sensation and warmth, and maybe even at the deepest level, it's an understanding that sort of love is the underpinning of all of it.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head. And actually, that clarity that you're talking about is kind of the goal of all these things, right? And so if you feel like there's many ways to get there, it's just that a lot of people are having trouble. I just read a news report yesterday. I don't know if you saw this. Surgeon General of the United States said that there's a crisis among parents, and I clicked it. And nearly half of all parents are too stressed to function. I don't know if you saw this. It was like in the news yesterday. And so I think that the interest in psychedelics right now, is to actually, it is in that medical sense. It is in trying, people are looking for a way to gain that clarity. It's like a lot of people would love to have that.
There's a sense, and when you talk about stress, that it's inevitable and there's no way around it.
Right.
That it's a pervasive kind of illness, I think, societal illness, and there's a this headlong sort of got to get it done attitude, and if I don't, I'm going to fall behind, and everything's balanced on the head of a pin because happiness isn't even in the equation. Some sort of happiness to me is a byproduct of how you live, not something to seek necessarily. It's the thing that kind of comes with a life of certain um, types of behaviors
Hmm.
that lead to it as a byproduct, and stress is certainly not part of that. It doesn't it and what are you stressed about? That's what I would ask anybody that's super stressed. It's usually, my time is taken up in survival mode, money, status, what other people might think. Some of these things you can really shift, I think, by changing your perception of what's going on. And that to me is one of the upsides of psychedelics. It's changes a perception.
Absolutely. And That's really key to what you ask what's going on in your brain. You are, with something like ayahuasca or like LSD, there's a lot of visual stuff going on. But to me, what's more valuable, and actually, they're not separate. A lot of these visions are tied to, like what you said, these kind of insights and perceptions into what it is that's causing you stress in your life, whether you are too worried about money or whether you are too caught up in your look, how other people see you in psychedelics, you tend to realize on a deeper level when you're on psychedelics how these things are affecting you and in many cases upsetting you and causing misery, right? And so that's to me that's their most powerful therapeutic application is the insight that they give you into yourself in terms of things that you have the power to change to make your life happier and more stress free and to have more clarity and to have to have less problems with other people. Psychedelics really bring up all this stuff, and um, that's one of the reasons why I think they're less likely to be addictive. Because unlike things like alcohol that kind of numb out problems, we drink alcohol to forget, or we drink alcohol to
Well, I think it's to feel good and to it puts you in the moment. That's really what it does. All that other stuff is shut out, and you just like, ugh.
Exactly. I mean, I've had my bouts with drinking, and yeah, sometimes you come out of this stressful job and you feel like a zombie, and after a couple drinks, you're like talking to everybody, and you feel alive again, right?
Sure. Take the edge off.
Yeah, take the
The
edge.
only problem is if you're made out of edge, which I believe that I might be.
So people have deep experiences with psychedelics. They have healing experiences, and but it's not all serious. I mean, people have like mushrooms, for example, are famous for making you laugh and laugh and laugh at things. And I've had that experience many times. Have you ever heard anybody talk about that, Bob? Like you see things from a different angle and it cracks you up. And I think
Absolutely.
that's
Well,
therapeutic too, because a lot of that is just taking things less seriously.
that's the best feeling ever. I
Yeah.
just, it's like, oh yeah, okay. All a kind of a joke here. Not to say you have to abdicate your responsibility for living, because what you were talking about is, I think really good is you when you change your perception, then that's just the beginning. Then what are the actions that I can take to change that? It's really about radical responsibility to me. What are the things I can do, and what are the things I can really honestly look at that I'm maybe repeating behaviors that don't serve me, or I'm around people that don't elevate me or serve me, and or maybe I'm doing a job that's just terrible for me. I mean, maybe I can't afford to quit, but how can I change the way I look at it?
Absolutely. That's really where you're right. That's where things happen. And in the psychedelic movement, there's a term called integration, and it's about like taking those insights and then integrating them into your life, and that is really where the magic happens or where the healing happens. It's not about just taking psychedelics over and over and over again until they change you. It's really, like you just said, it's really, you still have to make that commitment and make that effort to change your own life. When does your life change? It's when you change it, right? Like that's when you're going to have a life-changing experience, is when you change your life, right, Bob? That's kind of what it comes down to.
I
Yeah.
just remembered something when I was in college, long time ago, in the 70s, early 70s. It was Halloween night, and I took LSD, and I went out, and everybody was dressed up. And I had this realization, super clear. It was not a good one. That everyone was acting and dressed up like somebody they wanted to be and weren't, and never
Mm.
would be, and it made me really sad. And I had to go be away from people, because the overwhelming sadness of humanity grabbed me that night. Now, that could be what was going on with me too. I don't really know.
Mhm.
But it was so clear to me that people were living a way that wasn't um, honest, wasn't authentic. And I sort of globalized it. It's, everyone, people, I didn't bother to, look at individuals in terms of each person's life. I just saw this sort of, it was like an ugly cartoon to me. And I had to go be alone. Like I could not be around it. It was just, it grabbed me. Now, was that a positive outcome from that? In one way, it was. In that I got to see beyond the facade in a certain way. It didn't wreck me. Once I came down, I was pretty okay, and eventually completely okay. But I wonder about. I don't know. That was just a story, but I wonder about there's the intense effect when you're under the influence of these things, and then there's the residual effect. What is that? How long does it last? Do you have to keep repeating in order to remember? That those are the things that I find sort of can be areas that might be difficult.
Yeah, that is difficult. And I love that example you just gave. It reminded me, I don't know if you ever listened to George Carlin. And he had a bit about LSD, and he said he only took it one time, and that was enough. Because he,
Mm-hmm.
he said he took it one time and he had an experience like you described, where he really saw the society in a different light, and he changed his whole. He knew what he had to do, and he did it. And
Yeah.
then, according to him, uh, he didn't never had to take it again because he made that change. And I think for healing, it can be like that too. I think there's a trap in taking it a lot. I've met people. I met somebody who bragged about drinking ayahuasca over 1,000 times, and if you just hung out with her for an hour, you could see that there was still a lot of stuff to work on. You like taking ayahuasca 1,000 times hadn't necessarily. I don't know. I don't know how she was before that. Maybe I'm sure it helped to some degree, but you get my point. Really, where it's at. In terms of residuals, people do report flashbacks. I've never really had anything that intense.
Yeah. Me either.
Yeah,
That seems like a rare thing, and I worry about certain people that have mental health issues before they take something like that. I'm not talking about depression. I'm talking about some other kinds of things. Although, because the thing about altering your mind chemically, sometimes it can accentuate the very thing that you don't want. They used to talk about pot paranoia
right.
back in the day. And I had those experiences where I got really paranoid smoking weed. And that actually became more often than not. So I stopped that. And so I wonder about certain people because it could be kind of risky if you're really in a troubled state. Like, what's the preparation that you would tell somebody to have?
I'm glad you brought that up because for the kind of more serious psychedelics like ayahuasca, I do recommend. I mean, if people ask me about this stuff, I do recommend preparing. I even sometimes recommend doing one of these because I think I told you before we got online. I'm a Buddhist. I'm open to everything, but I'm a practicing Buddhist, and I recommend there are these 10-day silent retreats called Vipassana, and they're all over the world. There's like 5 centers here in California. I recommend people do something like that first because you do want to be as clear and kind of as stable as possible, you know? Um, you want to be prepared because you can have a harrowing experience.
Well, let's talk about the different options for psychedelics.
Okay.
There's LSD, there's ayahuasca, there's psilocybin, there's peyote. I would even say, from some of the people I've had on here, MDMA has been helpful to some people with mental health stuff. So there's like five right there. And I'm sure there's other things. How does somebody sort of look at what thing to do, and what are the risk factors or the benefit factors of all those different things? I forgot mescaline.
Mescaline, right? Which is in peyote and in several other cactuses. I want to use them for. I think what's emerging right now, and it's a very complex landscape, right? There's also ketamine. People are using ketamine as
Yeah.
kind of a
Hmm.
psychedelic. And there's a lot of controversy about a lot of these things. I think didn't the actor that died recently, it turned out to be a ketamine overdose.
Yes.
So there's a
Yeah.
lot of different factors at play. It is a hard landscape to navigate. Um, Microdosing, which you mentioned earlier, is always a good. It's kind of a safer way to start, taking very small amounts. And psilocybin is really a kind of psilocybin mushrooms is pretty easy to do that with. I don't know what it's like in LA, but in San Francisco, there's all these psychedelic churches, mushroom churches that have popped up, but they're really just like pot dispensaries. They're kind of like churches so that they can get the freedom of religion kind of thing to
Oh,
operate, you know? I'm sure you have them
yeah.
in LA too, but there's some really good products in there. And you go in and there's these bars. And the nice thing about the chocolate bars is they're all kind of broken into these squares. And the one I get, it's called the Buddha bar, I think. It's got the Buddha on it. Like I told you, I'm kind of a Buddhist too, so I kind of like that one. But it tells you right on the back what the dosages. And I think one or even two squares is a microdose. So people can start with a very small dose that's not going to take you into some kind of place where you're dealing with, your deepest inner demons or anything like that. You just kind of get the slightest kind of frosting on reality and see how it makes you feel, you know?
Hmm.
So I think
Okay.
that's a very safe way to start. And then there's all kinds of professionals now entering the field. There's indigenous people coming up and holding ceremonies. There's all kinds of ways to get into psychedelics. But I do think like maybe just microdosing is a good way to get started.
Guess there's a whole world. I don't really know much about it, but I didn't know about the churches at all. I just that was did not know. See, I was going to ask you about this. The legal aspects that some of these things are considered controlled substances. I don't think anybody really has any big consequences for delving into that world, but I suppose the potential would be, incarceration for some people if a government agency wanted to go after you.
Absolutely. And depending on where you are. Um, Here in California, most of the big cities have officially now decriminalized, which means it's not necessarily legal, but it does mean that the law enforcement has been told to just really not trouble themselves or other people over. There's a movement called decriminalize nature, which the first place that did it was Oakland. The first place it's basically they passed these legislations at the local level. Oakland did it, San Francisco did it, maybe Santa Cruz was the first. And then the whole state of Oregon, I believe Oregon is the only full state that's decriminalized, and that's opened the doorway for these churches to open up and operate as under freedom of religion, selling these things. But you're right, it's still quasi legal. And if you're in, I think even parts of California where it's not decriminalized, you can still get in trouble potentially, and definitely other parts of the country. It's just like the marijuana landscape is still patchwork as well. The psychedelic landscape is following kind of that same. I'd say the more progressive places are kind of opening up first, and so you do have to really watch where you are.
I'm sure people are booking airline flights right now.
Well, it's funny. Like here in Humboldt, I'm in Humboldt County, Bob. Uh, it's been decriminalized, but people are much more cautious about it. And I came up from San Francisco a week or two ago, and like it's open sales in San Francisco, really just open sales, and
Hmm.
nobody's worried about it because I guess they figure in San Francisco, I guess it's gotten to that level where everybody knows it's just not going to be a problem. But in Humboldt, there's still kind of this feeling like we don't know. Maybe the sheriff, like even though the city of Arcata decriminalized, maybe the Humboldt County sheriff is going to come in and bust us, right? So things are still kind of underground here, which is weird. Humboldt County is the place where homeless people don't even ask for money; they ask for weed, right? It's like this. It's been famous for its like black market economy forever, but it's all these things are still sensitive in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering what's going to happen. It's an interesting thing because it's it's not just the United States. It's a global thing. Obviously, it's things that grow in the ground and have been around since there was mankind. People have wanted to alter their perceptions and open things up since the beginning. I mean, it's not anything new. It's not new. It's just there is a desire. I think it's a really deep desire to have an experience that's that's impactful. So it's never going to go away, if that's for sure. And it may, it may increase. It seems like that's what will happen, only because the media, social media in particular, saturates the world now.
Yeah, a lot of the growth is through social media. Mexico now has a bill to legalize psilocybin mushrooms. And Mexico, of course, is where the traditional use of these mushrooms comes from. Down in the south of Mexico, you have these psilocybin using indigenous cultures. Back in the 50s, there was a guy who went down there and did an article about it for Time magazine and kind of blew that up. And it's become a mecca for psychedelic tourism in this area of Oaxaca, the Oaxacan highlands. But the senator that introduced this bill in Mexico is not indigenous. What she says is during the pandemic, she was experiencing such high levels of panic and anxiety that she experimented with a bunch of different things. And what she found the greatest relief from was mushrooms. And then she quotes some statistics, and I think these are global as well, about the rates of depression and anxiety disorders since the pandemic. And I think that's one of the big factors globally. One of the big factors behind this kind of explosion in interest in psychedelics, because it's kind of following on the heels of this explosion of it's kind of like an existential crisis. People feel instability, maybe in a way that's more intense than we're used to. Even though we
Yeah.
have everything we need, there's this kind of global instability at the same time.
Well, it's a little bit of a post-traumatic
Yeah,
reaction from being, afraid
right,
and isolated.
right,
Those are two things that are not healthy. And we were sort of forced to be both of those things
right.
for years. I know people that became and are very isolating. The fear is still there in their mind, and they don't want to go out. They don't want to be around other people, and they get strange. I get strange if I'm spend too much time alone. I love being alone, but I don't like it too much because your mind will just take you over in ways that are usually not very healthy. Um, we're pack animals, human beings. We need each other.
I
And
totally agree. Yeah.
and let's talk a little bit about the book because I know you wrote it with someone more from the academic side. And I think people listening to this are going to want to know that is part of what's in your book. So, say the title of the book?
The title of the book is Infinite Perception: The Role of Psychedelics in Global Transformation. And I am a co-editor along with Natalie Dyer, who PhD, who's a Harvard trained neuroscientist. And a lot of the people I pulled into it were people I met while covering psychedelics for different outlets like Reset Me or High Times Magazine. And also I have indigenous voices that are indigenous shamans that I know from the Amazon. And so then she pulled from like the research she was doing at Harvard and at different schools where she studies neuroscience and psychedelics, among other things. And so I think we have a nice balance of different voices from all over the place. But we have we have some big names, I should say. We have big names in here. We have like Dennis McKenna and Rick Doblin and Zoe Helene, who's got this outfit called Cosmic Sister, which is really at the forefront of kind of psychedelic feminism. Um, so, I mean, there's about 22 different voices in this book.
Sounds amazing. Uh, if you want to find out more about that world, folks, that sounds like the book you want to check it out. Let's talk about. I know you visited indigenous cultures. What have you seen that's blown your mind, and maybe in some ways, or just where you went, "Oh my gosh, that's incredible," either from a shaman or somebody that was, being guided by that? Have you seen some things that are just wonderful and remarkable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I think that world is remarkably beautiful, and I think it's why, like when we were just talking about how does psychedelics translate into modern society and why that's such a complex topic is because we're trying to figure out maybe how to do that in a different context, you know. But these shamanic rituals that have evolved uh over a millennium involve music and dancing and they're passed down. They're wisdom traditions and they go hand in hand. The traditions go hand in hand with these medicines that kind of open you up to them. And it really just, the whole thing is really beautiful. And I have a lot of respect for it. And I don't know myself how well all of that can be translated into the modern world. Um, I think the essence of it, like I don't know. That's a deep question, Bob. But I've seen some
Yeah,
very, yeah, I've met people that are so full of wisdom, and I think that's the most beautiful thing. And I've said this several times. I'm involved in the Buddhist world. The wisdom on level with like these Buddhist writings from 3,000 years ago, or the top Buddhist teachers, like that's I think what's remarkable. And it's outside. I think you can have that outside of these psychedelic medicines, but the fact that the kind of the guardians of these psychedelic medicines also carry that kind of wisdom is just amazing.
when you talk about music and dance being integrated into that, there's an aspect to wisdom that is can't be put into words.
Right.
That's kind of how I see it. There's things. There's an obviously I'm not the first person to ever say this because it's in Buddhist writings, but the talking about if you want to use the word God, let's say that word, but that for which there is no name. It's like as soon as you put a name on it, you got a problem. In a sense, it misses by labeling something. But the idea of dance and music being these non intellectual thought things that they just sort of are, they exist, they happen, and that being integrated, it makes me feel like there's something really solid there, even though it's the mind can't quite grasp it. It's more solid than what the mind can grasp, if that makes any sense.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. And that, going back to when we talked about seeing the things inside of you that are like stopping you from enjoying life fully. So I remember a lot of my ayahuasca experiences were like these guys over here singing and dancing, and I'm over here like in the darkness, like feeling miserable. And then what is it that's stopping? What's keeping me from this joy, right? And that
Yeah.
kind of inner investigation I found leads to like a lot of the healing because, yeah, you do ultimately want to live, you want to be happy and you want to be joyous. And I think it's one of the hallmarks of a good shaman is that they drink this medicine and then they share their joyous state with you. And it's kind of a nonverbal teaching. It's like this is kind of the goal in a way, to be this joyous, to be this musical and dancing and singing, even under the influence of something that's this strong. It's kind of maybe the proof that you've gotten somewhere.
Yeah, I was thinking about my cat just now when you were talking. When I watch my cat outside walk around, and there is a musical aspect to the way she walks around and the way she moves. It's dance and music. The way I kind of look at her when she's just sort of being a cat and doesn't know I'm watching.
Uh-huh.
And then I watch her pick a place to sit, And I wonder, why is she picking that place to sit? What is something? I mean, why that and not 2 feet away or 10 feet away? Now, is it just, oh, I want to be out of the sun or I want to be in the sun? It might be that, but there's still, even within that framework, and I'm thinking there's the cat isn't like thinking about anything. It just knows where to sit. It's an intuition. I mean, I'm gonna be getting too little woo woo here, but it is something that when I watch my cat, I'm like, wow, this is like, this is this is something, and I guess people do it too. It's like, I don't want to sit in that. Do you ever have that where you go into a room and you just know where you want to sit?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what makes that the place you want, or you go into a place and you go, I can't be here, or there's something off, that I'm sort of fascinated by that nonverbal thing that goes on with humans that, is, to me, you're being told by, I guess, intuition. And maybe when you expand what that is, then you make even better choices.
That's it. That's really it. When you see a cat, you see an animal that doesn't really worry. I mean, that's kind of the thing that's going on with the cat, right? They're just doing what they're gonna do. And I think that there was an author, I forgot who it was, it might have been like Ray Bradbury or somebody, who said something like, I've met several Buddhist master or Zen masters, and all of them were cats, or something like
Mm.
that. Because yeah, they really do. Cats, more than any other animal in a way, really do embody that spirit. Like you said, there's nothing like a cat relaxing in the sun. And there's nothing like that full attention that a cat gives something also when it's after it too, whether it's playing or actually hunting, that full awareness. Yeah, cats are beautiful creatures. I really love them.
Anything you'd like to add to the whole psychedelic experience? Have I missed anything that's in your book that you want to elaborate on?
I would just like to say psychedelics is a strange topic because it kind of is open to everything, right? Um, Although right now, like, to circle back to kind of what I said in the beginning, there is this huge interest in psychedelics that I really feel, and personally, for me, I have a friend who's a indigenous shaman. He's actually from the Arctic Circle, and he said, there's never been so much interest in psychedelics as there is right now, and there never will be again. And I think what he was trying to say is they have, and this is what, and this, I wanted to bring that up because the subtitle to this book, right, is The Role of Psychedelics in Global Transformation. And so the theme that runs through this book, even though it's 20 something different voices, is that there is a role of psychedelics in this kind of current globalized world figuring its way forward, right? Um, and that's why they're so important in the mental health epidemic. And in this book, we get deeper than that. We get into environmental consciousness, and we get into like helping us figure out some of our social issues. Um, and that might not have anything to do with the psychedelics themselves, other than their ability to allow us to do, like what you said in the beginning, kind of see things from a different perspective. And so that's all I want to say, is that that is kind of important right now. And I think that's really what's driving all this. And so that could be used for everything from personal relationships to solving world problems. There's not like one specific area where like seeing things differently can be helpful right now. Um, I can talk a little bit about my personal experience if you want,
Yeah,
which is
I do. I would love that.
okay. Yeah, it's been progressive, and I kind of totally agree with what we were saying earlier. It's not necessary to take psychedelics at all. And it's definitely not necessary to keep taking them, even if you benefited from them. A lot of the reason why I've kept up with them is because as an environmental journalist that spends a lot of time in the Amazon, I'm in that context. And, I, last couple times I drank ayahuasca was in the context of the cultural context of it. But for myself, I've experienced a lot of growth using psychedelics alongside um, other growth oriented means, like meditation, like making actual changes in my life, like actively working on improving my relationships with my family, actively working on taking better care of myself, and actively educating myself and changing my perceptions. And, it's like, that's what I want to say about psychedelics. And that's personal as well as global. That's how they've helped me. Um, but it's because I I wanted to change. I was miserable and I wanted to change. And so I did all these different things. I didn't just pop a pill. I did all these different things, and I keep doing different things. The last couple of years, I've really been learning qigong, tai chi type stuff, and I found that there's a real joy in this kind of ancient movement. Um, and I like to dance too. I spent a lot of time in Colombia, uh, as well as Peru, Brazil, Mexico. But in Colombia, there's this really strong salsa culture, and I just think that the dance culture of people going out and dancing and being social, and that's nonverbal. They don't have to sit down and have these big conversations like we tend to do at a bar. We go to a bar in the United States, we sit down, and like you said, we drink. We have to have a couple drinks just to break the ice. And then I don't know, when I used to drink a lot, you probably had this experience, but there's a point where the conversation is interesting, and then there's a point where you had too many drinks, and it just and sometimes that point where it's interesting gets smaller and smaller the more you.
Yeah, and it's just loud and sloppy.
It's just loud and sloppy. So one of the beautiful things about some of these Latin American dance cultures is there's less talking and just more dancing. And I find that there's less drinking because there's no room for sloppy on the dance floor, right? It's like
Yeah, and you feel just as good, if not better. Certainly the next day you don't feel as bad if you're just dancing.
Absolutely.
I was just, when you were talking about solving world problems, and I just had this image of it's kind of an awful of dosing the entire House of Representatives and the Senate, the entire government all on the same day. And what would happen if all these sort of bloated pink men had an awakening?
I think it would be awesome. If they were open to it. If they didn't know what was going on, they might all just freak out and they might all push the red buttons. I don't know.
Well, you'd have to tell them, but after you'd say, something just happened. You don't know this, but don't worry, you're going to be fine.
Right.
There's no turning back now, so you might as well enjoy it.
Dosing them might be the best way to do it, especially if they're suffering from depression. Like if you're already suffering from depression, what do you have to lose? Like all that money obviously didn't get you the happiness, right? Obviously.
No, sometimes it makes it worse because it's a glaring mirror to this didn't fix it. That's a tough, that can be a tough one. There was that great line, there's two things wrong with money, not enough and too much.
Right.
Something in between there. And I like to add, and also when the people with too much think it's not enough.
I think maybe it's habitual, Bob. Like you get so used to always wanting more that when you have enough, you're in this mental habit that you can't just stop and enjoy it, right? It's kind of like an addiction, right?
Well, it is an addiction, just like any other addiction. It's absolutely an addiction.
Yeah.
It's you're trying to fill a hole that you can't, so you keep wanting more. But hopefully that people are open to trying some things, and this certainly is an option to add to your toolbox of how to live a fulfilled life. I really appreciate talking to you today. I didn't know how it was going to go. It went great.
Yeah.
I love the topic. I think folks, if you want to pick up the book, there may be some benefit to you. Well, there will be. Even if you don't like it, that's a benefit. You'll go, I don't want to do that. But you might go, ooh, this might be something I could try. And again, there's experiential stories in there and research for people in the field who've been researching it. Say the name of the book again, and if there's a website people can contact you or want to find out more, because I know you've written a ton of articles too. So lay it out there, man. Let everybody know
All
what's
right.
going on with Ocean.
Okay, Ocean Malandra here with the book Infinite Perception, The Role of Psychedelics in Global Transformation. It's available on Amazon. It's also available through our publisher, Collective Inc. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram, Ocean Malandra, at Ocean Malandra. I've written for over 30 different media outlets. I've been doing this for over 15 years. Everyone from Vice to USA Today to High Times to environmental websites like Mongabay and Earth Island Journal. I hope you enjoy the book. It is broken down into three sections. We've got cultural transformation. We've got kind of societal transformation, which is kind of the more serious stuff where I've got some of the bigger institutions involved with psychedelics in there, like MAPS and ICEERS, and they were kind enough to write chapters. And then the last section, though, is just called personal transformation. It's all first person stories about how psychedelics helped individual people change their lives. And in some ways, that's maybe the best section because that's the final word is your own kind of your own experience, and so those people in a way have the most authority to me because it's their own story. It's not the results of some test that and they're reading data. They're telling you their own experience. Yeah.
Well, I always love stories, that I can relate to that. It's kind of like the difference between studying music theory and listening to a song. It's
Totally. Totally.
Wow. Well, I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, Bob, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show. I had a great time, and I'm really happy with the conversation went in all kinds of interesting directions. I love it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
All right, have a good day.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. The website is theexplodinghuman.com. There's a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Once again, I want to thank Ocean Malandra for being on the show. And check out the new book, Infinite Perceptions, The Role of Psychedelics in Global Transformation. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.